Hare Krishna.
Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. We'll see. I can't just do it right. You can't do that now. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. It's gone. It's gone. ISKC. Yeah. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Rama, Hare Hare, Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada.
Krishna. Okay, it works. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paschatya Desatarine Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. The topic for this particular seminar is Light of the Bhagavat. And during our first session, the plan is to give a little background on how it came into being. And to do that, we have to go back a little bit in Srila Prabhupada's life as a householder, entering into the Vanaprastha stage of life, and then eventually his sannyas stage of life. It's a bit of a journey, very interesting. The primary resource for all of this is Lilamrita, describing the earlier stages of Srila Prabhupada's life. So let's go to his household life. In 1952, you see this image on the screen. Whoops. Image on the screen in the upper right. There's Srila Prabhupada with a child on his lap. His smaller stature father, Gaur Mohan Dey, and his mother with some children, and his wife by his side, and some family assistants. He was to become a world acharya, but somehow the same success wasn't happening right in his home. He was trying in various ways to encourage his family members to become involved in devotional life, but there wasn't a good match, particularly from his wife's side. In the year 1954, at the age of 59, Srila Prabhupada entered the Vanaprastha stage. The circumstance was unpleasant. It was the culmination of a whole sequence of unpleasant things. But at that time, it wasn't easy to procure, to receive, to purchase a Srimad Bhagavatam. Now we have with the Bhaktivedanta purports, and sits on your shelf. It's a big publication. But he had a Bhagavatam without all those commentaries, and his good wife, almost in defiance of him, traded the Bhagavatam for some tea biscuits. I don't even know what tea biscuits are, but that was too much. So he decided to leave. He was unhappy and disappointed, but he already had a mandate from his spiritual master to go to the West and preached the message of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to the English-speaking parts of the world. So his journey began. He left home. In Lilamrita, it's described he got on a train heading for he didn't even know where. And he got down in the south section of Calcutta and stayed in an ashram there for some time. And his future was unclear. Oops. Here. His future was unclear, but preparing himself was on the forefront of his mind. The bigger mission, English-speaking parts of the world, it's a big world. And how do you do that? He was just a single person. When he left his household life, he didn't bring resources with him. Everything was there with his family. His sons were elderly enough to take care of the family business so that they were taken care of. They could take care of his wife and everything could go on. But where he was going, just the bigger picture was prepare himself, but exactly how it was going to work was not at all clear. One of the things that he did in 1954, nope, it's not moving. The slides are not moving. Oops, there we go. Okay. He found two ladies that owned some property in Jhansi, and they seemed genuine and seemed very enthusiastic. It's an interesting chapter of Prabhupada's life. And they volunteered some land that he could develop into a nice temple. So it's during this period of time, this is 1954, that the chronology of things becomes important, where although there was the Gaudiya Mat, the mission of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Srila Prabhupada had established in a legal document registered with the government. He didn't call it ISKCON, he called it League of Devotees. This term, League of Devotees, was a term that Bhaktisiddhanta would use to describe his vision that the devotees of the world should come together, work together, and establish the supremacy of Krishna in the consciousness of people in general. So ISKCON has its 7 purposes. League of Devotees had its more than 7 purposes, but some very similar language, different, but similar language to the purposes of ISKCON. And as you can see how tall those letters are, the letters are about 6 feet tall, the League of Devotees. The ladies somehow started getting tricky. They required of him that if he was going to begin some construction, he had to complete it within a fixed period of time or he would lose everything. And he understood what that meant. They were tricky, and so he walked away from the opportunity. And it's now, 1954. So he's back in Delhi in 1956, where the circumstances are pretty extreme. Those of you who've been in Delhi or Vrindavan in the winter and summer season, summers are unbearably hot, and winters are very, very cold. Here's some description directly taken from Lilamrita. In the winter, Abhay was trying to print back to Godhead. In winter's discomfort, he walked to the early morning streets of Delhi to visit Surendra Kumar Jain, the printer, to read the latest proofs. By walking, he saved money. He had no chadar, only a lightweight cotton jacket, and he wore rubber shoes. He also wore a cotton hat that covered his ears and tied beneath his chin, protecting him from the 40-degree wintry mornings and the sometimes gusty winds. We get the picture. He is in his 60s and alone in the city streets of Delhi, working on Back to Godhead magazine at that time was very modest. It's not like the glossy color publication today. So it's very simple. But that was what his immediate project was. Then the summer came and 110-degree heat made it almost intolerable to spend time out of doors. Hot, dust-laden winds blew in the city streets. Street side hawkers closed their businesses during the day. In early May, during 112-degree heat, a man collapsed in the street and died of heat stroke. But Abhay ignored the heat and the ordinary limitations of the body. So he's not a young man, he is a senior citizen, moving about the city streets of Delhi, remember, having left his household life in his vanaprastha stage of life. He decided 2 years after leaving home to keep shelter at Keshigat. Here's a photograph of the outside of the Keshigat temple. Now it says Vangshi Gopalji temple near Keshigat. It's not exactly a temple. When we read in Lilamrita or hear Prabhupada say many times, there were 5,000 temples in Vrindavan. This is one of those 5,000. It's actually a wealthy family's home. And in those days, when somebody had sufficient wealth, they would then make a little temple. So in their home, which was like an extended family home with many, many, many rooms upstairs, there's the front entrance. And we'll take a look and see what it looked like inside. There's the front entrance from the front side. There's the sign above the entrance door indicating Vangshi Gopal Mandir. And when you go inside, what you see on the right is the courtyard. And in the courtyard, continue walking past the Tulsi plant, and you see those arches where the temple itself is, along with the residential quarters of the family. And here's the deities, Shri Shri, Radha, Vangshi Gopal. Look very closely and you can see the flute of Vangshi Gopal. His Vangsi's on the floor in front of him because they're making a deity offering, and when the offering is made, the flute is taken from the deity's hand. Nice deity. This is the family deity, Shri Radha Vangshi Gopal. And here's the 28 steps leading up to his room. So from the ground floor, where the temple is, there's one set of steps. Not working. There it is. There's one set of steps, another set of steps leading to his elegant room. The room was 17 feet by 9 feet with a 10-foot ceiling. And you can see that paint is peeling off and There are some windows, but there's not any of the other things that you normally find in residential quarters. There's no toilet, no running water, no kitchen, no heater, no fans. They're very stark. And just keep this picture in your mind as we go forward. It's in this room that Srila Prabhupada wrote this book. And the vision that Prabhupada had was very grand. The circumstance was quite Spartan, very, very simple, and hard to imagine how somebody could envision a worldwide spiritual movement from this humble beginning. From the roof, you see, looking out in the back, there's the Jamuna River. So this one facility, it had a little terrace, and directly from Srila Prabhupada's room. Looking in the other direction, here's some of the other rooftops and another nice photograph of the River Jamuna. Very nearby, we'll see a map next, is where the Keshi Ghat is actually situated. Here's from the front part of Prabhupada's quarters, looking down to the entrance to the residence and the temple itself. Here's the Vangsi Gopal Mandir in pink. I hope you can see it okay. I can't use my laser pointer because what's on my screen is not what you see. So there's the Jamuna River up on the above in the northerly direction. And not far from Vangsi Gopal Temple is the Radharaman Temple. There's Gopal Bhatta's Samadhi. The area in which Gopal Bhatta's temple was the Nidhivan area, a rasa dance section of Vrindavan, and so on. There's many other places shown on this map. But just to give you an idea of where we are, or where Prabhupada was at this time. So now, 1956 to 1962. So that's 6 years he stayed in that little room. And he didn't just stay in Vrindavan. He would move back and forth to Delhi, and continuing with his Back to Godhead magazine, seeking subscribers and donors for his mission to go to the West, and mixing with people and giving his message and taking whatever opportunities came, because he's you can say a beggar sannyasi. He's the beggar of Krishna for the mercy that was needed in order to fulfill the mission that Bhaktisiddhanta gave him. And whatever he tried, it didn't work. Now, we also have situations where we try something, it doesn't work. And then we try something a little differently and it doesn't work. In other words, our situation is not so different than Prabhupada's, or Prabhupada's situation is not so different from ours, at least in terms of having some mission or purpose to fulfill, and somehow it doesn't work. But he continued. He continued because he's carrying in his heart his life's mission. And his life's mission was explicitly given. We know the history. The very first meeting and the final exchange of communication between him and Bhaktisiddhanta was the same thing. Now, it's worth noting that historically, Prabhupada wasn't the only person who was asked to do this service. Many others were also asked to do the service, but in one person at least, it lodged deep within his heart. And he made it his mission in life. And it wasn't happening. The picture shows us it wasn't happening, and it wasn't happening, and it wasn't happening. So during this period of time, when Prabhupada was moving back and forth between Vrindavan and Calcutta, Vrindavan and Delhi, one of the places that he visited naturally was in Mathura. And one of the persons who he developed a close friendship with in Mathura was Keshava Maharaj. And Keshava Maharaj eventually became his sannyas guru, because Keshava Maharaj was encouraging Prabhupada, in fact, directing Prabhupada. Our spiritual master, Bhaktisiddhanta, has given you a mission. And for you to fulfill this mission, it will be so much better for you as a sannyasi. And so persuading. Prabhupada was in a humble mood. I'm not qualified to do the mission, what to speak of taking sannyas. But he persuaded him. And in 1959, Prabhupada accepted the sannyas orders with the intention that this would help him with his bigger mission. Something happened in 1962. Another person that Prabhupada had developed a friendship with was the Goswami who was in charge of the Radharaman temple. Vishvambar Goswami had become a close friend and supporter of Srila Prabhupada. As you may know, Vishvambar Goswami was amongst all the Goswamis of the Goswami temples in Vrindavan. He was especially well known for his expertise in deity worship. So when it came time for establishing the Krishna Balaram temple, Prabhupada requested Vishvambar Goswami to oversee the installation of Krishna Balaram. And it was purposeful because everyone respected him. And he engaged the other Goswamis in some parts of the yajna. And it took 3 days. It was really quite an extravaganza. And Vishvambar Goswami was overseeing the whole thing. So later on, they couldn't complain and say it wasn't done right. The deity worship the deity installation wasn't done right, because they did it themselves. Prabhupada was very smart. And Vishvambar was very respected. So Vishvambar Goswami had a relationship with the Goswami in charge of the Radha Damodar temple. So Vishvambar suggested to that Goswami, instead of having Srila Prabhupada stay at the Vangsi Gopal temple, why don't you have him stay? You have 2 rooms in the Radha Damodar temple, and you're in charge of the Radha Damodar temple. Let him come there and stay there instead. So that Goswami at the Radha Damodar temple, he invited Prabhupada to come and stay in his 2 rooms. So they had some discussion back and forth, but the encouragement was specifically, his name was Gaurachand Goswami, who was the one in charge when Prabhupada stayed in Radha Damodar temple. So there were 2 rooms, and they were in bad repair. You know, it's not the modern times. During those times, there wasn't the zillion visitors to Vrindavan. It was a quiet place. So Prabhupada accepted it back and forth, but he had first put in some electricity, because there wasn't electricity, some place where he could do his cooking. And the fee that Prabhupada paid was something like 5 rupees per month. Now 5 rupees then is not 5 rupees today, but it was like something like $1 a month for the rooms, 2 rooms. And he had to spend 500 rupees, which he didn't have, but he had to gather the rupees so he could fix the rooms so they were habitable. And on the upper left, you see what the temple looks like today. In the lower left is a photograph of Srila Prabhupada visiting with some of his disciples in 1972, if I remember correctly. Prabhupada took some of his disciples to Vrindavan and took them to all the holy places in Vrindavan. And one of the places they stayed, Prabhupada stayed in his rooms at the Radha Damodar temple. Now, there were two rooms. One was a room for writing, which we see in the upper right. And the lower right is that little room where Prabhupada would do his cooking. And when it's a very celebrated photo, looking out the window. Now, now you look out the window, you see something else. But during Prabhupada's time, it was just a large courtyard, and the samadhi of Rupa Goswami and the bhajan kutir of Rupa Goswami. And there he stayed for a number of years. So July 1962, he moved from the Vangsi Gopal temple. And it's during this period of time, he's writing, in addition to Back to Godhead magazine, he's writing the beginnings of Srimad Bhagavatam. And let's read what Lilamrita has to say about this. That was his real purpose in coming here, the Radha Damodar temple, to prepare the books he could distribute to the people of the West. Although as yet he had no means for traveling even as far as Japan, and no means for printing books, these were the goals for which he had worked. He had not come to Vrindavan to die and return to Godhead. Rather, he had come because it was the ideal place to gain spiritual strength for his main life's work. And that was the understanding from Gaurchand Goswami. This is a very auspicious place where Rupa Goswami envisioned the same as what you're trying to do, take his blessings. Now, there's many biographical examples. There's one that I like very much. Then one of the custodians at the Radha Damodar temple said, sometimes in the early morning hours at 1 a.m. when no one is up, Srila Prabhupada had a broom and he was leaning over and with a little broom sweeping in front of the Radha Damodar, the Rupa Goswami Samadhi and Bhajan Kutir, and calling out his name, crying his name, appealing for Rupa Goswami's mercy. Because Prabhupada felt, mission impossible. I don't have the qualification. How do you go to the world and present Krishna consciousness when you don't have anything? He had knowledge. He had writing ability. This is something that's very important as we go forward in time. He had been requested when he was moving about, he had been requested by Kesava Maharaj to assist him. It's an important part of the history that I should present. Yeah. Kesava Maharaj was asking him to stay with him in Mathura and help him with one of the publications. Kesava Maharaj was also a gifted writer. The Harmonist. Now, some of you have been around for a while and you know what the Harmonist is. It was like the preliminary to Back to Godhead magazine. And Kesava Maharaj was the chief editor, and he knew that Srila Prabhupada had some capacity to write, so he wanted him to stay with him, or at least help him with his publication work with the Harmonist. Srila Prabhupada also received an invitation from someone in Delhi to assist with another publication because Bhaktisiddhanta had as a major part of his mission publication work, sometimes in Hindi, sometimes in Bengali, sometimes in English, regular publications. And so Prabhupada was being asked to do these two different things. He tried. He received an invitation to go to Bombay. And one of the persons that we've heard many times in Prabhupada's Lilamrita, Acharya Prabhakar. And he was working as in the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan. He was a secretary for that organization, and he wanted Prabhupada's help. So Prabhupada was being encouraged to be an assistant individual in some projects these other persons were doing. But somehow it didn't work. Prabhupada was given the title of an official title as an honorary professor of Bhagavad Gita at the governor of Maharashtra at the time. So Prabhupada was following these different leads here and there and elsewhere, but it really wasn't working out the way that he wanted it to work out. You know, specifically the longer term vision of going to the West, to the English-speaking parts of the world. And so he just settled back in Vrindavan and was working on his Bhaktivedanta purports to Srimad Bhagavatam. The purpose of sharing this is he's now a new sannyasi. He has the world as his field, and he's a literary skilled person. And there are persons who want to engage that literary skill in different ways. He's recognized, he's influencing, leading people to some degree at least, in appreciating he has a message, he speaks it very strongly. But all the pieces weren't coming together that, you know, led to his eventually coming to the West. In 1962, that's when the first published volume of Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Part 1, was made available. Somehow he got the funds, and the printer printed the book. So he had a beginning. And when no one else was up at 1 o'clock in the morning, that's when he would start his writing, because electricity sometimes just goes off and on, and as it does even today in India. So then it was even more so. So he would often write just by lantern. Picture it, 1 o'clock in the morning in those little rooms in Radha Damodar temple, creating the Bhaktivedanta purports. And the next year, 1963, first canto part 2, and in 1964, first canto part 3. So he completed the first canto in those years, 62 to 64. Now, it's during this period of time that during one of his visits to Delhi to sell subscriptions to Back to Godhead magazine, etc., an acquaintance that he had made gave him a brochure or a little flyer for an event that was to take place in Japan. Now, this is January 1962, January 1961. And it's January 1961. He's still at the Vangsi Gopal temple. And so a friend gave him a flyer, a little pamphlet describing an event to take place in Tokyo called Congress for the Cultivation of Human Spirit. And a very high sounding idea. On the map, you see that the distance between India and Japan. My picture of what was going on in the world at this time is it's post-World War II. And during World War II, wars between nations was a very fearful thing. And it was rampant. And when the war was over, countries weren't so readily in having tourists come. They weren't issuing visas. Their walls were up and people were being protective of their nation and their interests. And gradually over time, that pendulum started to move in the direction of working together. The United Nations was built, and intellectual and thoughtful persons, leaders in the world, were starting to think more in terms of working together rather than protecting against attacks and, people who would be aggressors. So it was in that period of time that this gentleman, the organizer of this event, conceived of a Congress for the Cultivation of Human Spirit. So Prabhupada thought, why not? Because he was trying a number of other things experimentally to see how he could push the message and the mission of Bhaktisiddhanta forward. So he wrote to the organizer of this event, and he thought, why not? This may give me some lessons in how to navigate by going abroad and giving the message of the Srimad Bhagavatam to others in other parts of the world. And so he then began to consider the message of Srimad Bhagavatam and the audience. And the audience are people from the Far East. He understood that they have a natural inclination to understand lessons of life from nature. And so he thought of a contribution he could make to this conference by writing a book where people would understand lessons of life from nature, which is natural. It's very, very wise and very thoughtful approach. And so he began to conceive of a project where the Canto 10, Chapter 20 would be the showcase of a book that he would present at this conference. Now, Canto 10, Chapter 20 is a description of Krishna's childhood pastimes. And just after the summer season came the rainy season and then the autumn season. And that's what Chapter 20 is. It's just descriptions of nature. And so what he did was he wrote this letter . He wrote a letter to the event organizer, the sponsors or the organizers of the event. They have an organization, International Foundation for Cultural Harmony, very high sounding organization. And the title, he had a speech. This is the classic way that something is done. if you're going to be a participant in an event, you have a speech, and the speech has a title, and then there's some literature that goes with the speech, like, a more substantial document. This is a standard way in literary work or education activities, big functions. So his speech was, how should one cultivate human spirit? The Bhagavatam's message, but just gave it that title because that's their theme. And he wrote the following message to the organizers. I wish to impress the public delegates who would internationally join the conference for culture and human spirit in Japan about the necessity of an international movement. Now picture in your mind that little room where he was staying. And his vision is not that little room. His vision is already 1961. Thoughtful, educated, broad-minded persons come together and establish an international movement for the culture of human spirit. And he wrote, towards this unifying purpose, he wanted their cooperation to help him fulfill the purpose of the mission. He's just, picture, he's reaching out to an opportunity. He doesn't really know where it's going to go. Doesn't even know if it's going to go because the man hasn't written back yet, but just sharing with the man his vision, which resonates with their vision. And so Prabhupada requested him essentially, send me a letter so I can get a passport and a visa, because he didn't have a passport. And he certainly didn't have a visa either. Kindly, therefore, do the needful immediately and give me a chance to speak to the enlightened people of the world, the message of human culture from the Vedic literature. I am sure that such news will change the angle of vision of the world's activities. Reading these words, I'm picturing that little room, 17 feet by 9 feet. And the author is envisioning changing the world through the message of Srimad Bhagavatam. It's pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. So the gentleman wrote back the letter here's the letter that says, this is an invitation letter to attend our event. I'll take care of your accommodation, or to the government people, I will take care of his accommodation and his food. And please do the needful so he can get his paperwork together and can come and participate in our event. So he's the General Secretary of the International Foundation for Cultural Harmony. So with that, Prabhupada is feeling encouraged. Now remember that there's not a lot of time. Early January, the event is going to be early May. January, February, March, April, May, 5 months. And so within 5 months, while Prabhupada is writing his Back to Godhead magazine and the volumes of Srimad Bhagavatam Canto 1, with those writing projects going on, he then begins this work of Light of the Bhagavat. Now there's a painting that eventually became one of the cover paintings of the book, Light of the Bhagavat. And his vision was that there would be 50 verses drawn from chapter 20. Now, chapter 20 has more than 50 verses, so he didn't use every single verse. And he rewrote the verses specific for the audience to help explain the frame for the lessons of life. to be learned from these depictions from chapter 20. And he wrote a 20,000 word manuscript. He didn't have a typewriter, didn't have a computer, didn't have a library. He had a Bhagavatam and had a vision and a capacity for writing. So he began the work. And the light of the Bhagavat will mention where the title comes from. Yeah, so many of you will do this later. We'll do it now as well as later. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, the format of Srimad Bhagavatam is questions, answers. In the the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam is a scene where the sages of Naimisharanya have gathered, knowing that Krishna has departed. And when Krishna departs, then Kali Yuga will begin. And when Kali Yuga begins, things get really bad and get worse and worse and worse. Knowing that Kali Yuga was coming, they wanted to do something. So the something they decided to do was to conduct a series of sacrifices, yagyas, one after the next. As soon as one was done, another one would begin for 1,000 years to counteract the negative influences of the age of Kali. And Naimisharanya was the chosen place to conduct those yagyas. It's a very nice place, wonderful place to visit, sacred place. And as they were beginning their yagyas, they noticed in their midst was Sutta Goswami, who had just completed hearing Srimad Bhagavatam from Shukadev Goswami. And everyone knew that that was the most wonderful literature. So they wanted him to speak. And to prompt him to speak, they asked questions. And that's how Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 1 begins. They have a series of questions. And following those questions, the answers are in chapters 2 and 3 of Canto 1. So the final of the 6 main questions that they presented was very practical, exactly what they were doing. Now that Krishna has left, because while Krishna was present, religious principles were protected. He came to protect religious principles, but now Krishna's gone. So how will religious principles be upheld? The age of Kali is coming. And the answer was, just as at nighttime it's dark and you need light, when Krishna was present, there was sufficient light. But after his departure, it becomes the dark age of Kali. And to get light in this dark age of Kali, the Srimad Bhagavatam has appeared. The Srimad Bhagavatam is as brilliant as the sun, just as in the darkness of night, it's dark because the sun has set. But as brilliant as the sun, but as soothing and cooling as the moon, the light of the Srimad Bhagavatam is to give light to people in this dark age of Kali. And thus the title of the book, The Light of the Bhagavat, is taken from that verse. Canto 1, Chapter 3, verse 28, Light of the Bhagavat. So Prabhupada wanted to give to this conference the light of the Bhagavat. So although it's specific, it's chapter 20, he's giving the message of the Srimad Bhagavatam through this little book. And it's 50 verses or commentaries And he wanted the organizer of the conference to find an artist. So along with the manuscript of the book, Prabhupada had descriptions of 50 paintings in detail of what he wanted the paintings to depict. The idea is the paintings would go into the book that he wanted the organizer of the event to publish. He didn't publish it. He didn't get the artist. Lots of things were there in Prabhupada's vision that didn't happen. But he's building this, international organization through the medium of this event in Japan, although it didn't happen the way that he wanted it to happen. So much later, when the book didn't get published, nor did the paintings get painted, nor did he go to Japan, the manuscript was found many years later, and then it was published. We'll get there shortly. So he has a vision from this little room in Vamsi Gopal Temple of how he's going to present on a world stage the message of Srimad Bhagavatam in a way that the people of Japan or the Orient or the Far East could relate to and understand. So he has all this grand vision, and there's some obstacles on the path. And one of the obstacles on the path is he didn't have the money to get to Japan. Now, in those days, a ticket, an airline ticket to Japan was 3,500 rupees. The exchange of currency was altogether different. But he didn't have the funds, because when he took Vanaprastha, he didn't keep a pension, a monthly stipend. He didn't have anything. Everything was with his family, but that was okay. So he is now, he had become a sannyasi. So as a sannyasi, he went here and there with a message. I'm a renounced person representing our culture. Please make all the arrangements so that I can travel to this event. And that was his message. And he carried his message to many different people. Some of the people he carried the message to were the Ministry of Scientific Research and Cultural Affairs. Well, that didn't go anywhere. He met with Dr. Radhakrishna, the Vice President of India at the time. That didn't go anywhere. He went to various donors in Delhi and Bombay. Didn't go anywhere. He contacted the event organizer himself to help him with the airfare. That didn't go anywhere. So he couldn't cover his travel expenses, what to speak of the publishing of the book. And as a result, 20,000 word book with the whole vision of what the book would accomplish, it didn't happen. But Prabhupada was not discouraged. There was some disappointment. He had invested obviously time and energy and lots of thought in what this potential visit could mean. It didn't plan out, didn't work out that way. But the very next year, instead, he received an invitation from the Aurobindo ashram, and he drafted a lecture, a two-part lecture, that would say the same message as was the Light of the Bhagavat message. And he delivered that lecture. And he published something in their publication describing what he had written about. So he's taking an opportunity, creating a plan with that opportunity, working with it in different ways. And 23 years later, the manuscript was found in a trunk. Don't know the details of where the trunk was, but there were other manuscripts in that trunk. I think I'm going to mention one of them. One of the manuscripts in that trunk was a lecture that Srila Prabhupada had drafted in a very similar way. He was, during Prabhupada's householder days, he was a follower of Gandhi, at least the early householder days, and still a young man. And when Gandhi's funeral was taking place, Prabhupada was invited to be a keynote speaker. So as the keynote speaker, he followed the same pattern. There was a speech, but there was also a document that went along with the speech. There was a whole manuscript of Prabhupada's lecture. And the lecture said, essentially, the way to honor a great person is not simply what is conventionally done. You build a statue for them, or you name a street after them, or you name a building after them, and that's how you honor a great person. He said, rather, a great person has values that they hold, ideals that they hold, and the way to honor a great person is to establish a community that exemplifies the teachings that they held. So then he described that since Gandhi valued so much Bhagavad Gita, then that place, that community should be called Gita Nagari. So later when that manuscript was found of the lecture that he had given and the paper that was going along with that lecture, it in ISKCON it became known as the Gita Nagari Manifesto. Because when Prabhupada at a certain point in time just said, and in our temples that are matured, in addition to the city temple for preaching, the city temple should also establish a farm community. So I was involved in helping to raise the funds for that farm community. It was mainly through book distribution. The funds came. And when Gita Nagari Farm was purchased, it wasn't known as Gita Nagari Farm, it was called the New York Farm. And then the last visit that Prabhupada made to New York, he got on one of the Radha Damodar buses. In fact, it was Vishnu Jan Swami's bus. And Radha Damodar went with the group of sannyasis and everybody that went in Vishnu Jan Swami's bus to visit the New York farm. And then that's at that time, he gave it the name, Gita Nagari. But at that time, they still didn't know about this manuscript. And then later when the manuscript was found, it was like, wow. Prabhupada had this vision that hadn't manifested through time yet, but he had a name and an idea and a description of what everything would be. It was quite a visionary. So one of those visionary efforts was this manuscript, The Light of the Bhagavat. 23 years later, in a trunk, the manuscript was found, along with the description of the 50 paintings that Prabhupada wanted, and the details of what he was asking the organizer of this event. So that manuscript was at that time given to Tamal Krishna Maharaj, because Tamal Krishna Maharaj had been designated by Srila Prabhupada as being the GBC for China. His headquarters at that time were in Hong Kong rather than mainland for different reasons. And Tamal Krishna Maharaj, being the personality that he was, he took the manuscript and made it into a book. So in 1984, the first publication was done of Light of the Bhagavat. It was done in Chinese. And as Prabhupada had wanted, there was a lady who was assigned or engaged in making these paintings. There's some biographical information about her life. She was very elderly at this time. She was a celebrated person in a particular art style from mainland China. Her eyesight wasn't so good, but she came monthly. This I heard from Giridhari Swami. From her hometown, she took her artwork by train to Hong Kong. showed the art director, Tamal Krishna Maharaj, her work. And, he arranged everything the way that he wanted it to match Srila Prabhupada's written description of what he wanted in these paintings. And as a result, the light of the Bhagavat then manifested, translated from English to Chinese. Now, this is an English cover. There was it was in Chinese, the cover. And the book was finally circulated. It then became a BBT copyright book. The English version was published in English, and it was translated into Chinese and, into French and German and Portuguese and this and that and the other languages. Now, you see at the bottom, those of you that would like to read the book as we go along with this seminar, there's the database link for Light of the Bhagavat, and you'll be able to read it. So this is our final slide. Whoops. This one is our final slide. His intention, just with the title itself, was the illumination, the light that comes from Srimad Bhagavatam. His design was for the audience, the people from that part of the world have a liking for understanding lessons of life through scenes of nature. So I put the two together, and as we go forward, the whole message of Srimad Bhagavatam is packed up in this little book. Very powerful, very masterful, very creative, and very powerful. Now, I just will share one other little thing. I became interested in this book. I knew of the book, but I had never read it. And I became interested in it because